guys. FMbebop here, coming to you live from quarantine, depression, otaku, scenic my place. And today, I haven't done this in a few weeks, but I figured I'd come back into this ASMR game by talking about Studio Gainax. Some of you may know who this studio is, some of you may not. I, for one, know damn well who these people are, and I love them so much, because I am, in fact, an otaku myself. So, this is really, if any of you have watched my video essays in the past, this is pretty much going to be a replacement for them, because my god, those videos take a while, and I already have this and school and personal shit to tend to nowadays, and it's kind of tough, but I'm improvising, just improvising. So, without further ado, we are going to explore all the history of Studio Gainax via Anime News Network, the website that I find is the most reliable for my anime sources, in my opinion. Some of you may disagree. And if you do, then that's fine. You don't get a cookie anyways. But with all that said, I'm FMbebop. Enjoy my voice. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. This is a blind reading, by the way, so this will go absolutely smoothly. Here we go. There are few stories within anime production that are as exciting as the story of Studio Gainax. Instead of the typical story of Mr. Producer used to work at Company X, but he wanted to produce his own shows, so he started up Company Y, there is no singular person responsible for the formation of Gainax. Instead of an accomplished producer, this was a group of science fiction nerds. Instead of the decades of experience most studio founders have, they had a couple of short films. And instead of having large financial investments, they didn't. In 1978, the sci-fi nerd. To Toshio Okada, being an otaku isn't just about liking something. It's about seeking out further knowledge and having the self-awareness to describe exactly what the appeal of your hobby is. And so, it was never enough for Okada to just enjoy science fiction. He needed to explore and discuss it as well. In fact, this was the reason he joined Osaka Electrocommunication University to begin with. Not for the classes, but instead to join the university's science fiction club. Living on a monthly allowance from his parents, he decided to skip his classes entirely, opting to spend his time immersing himself in science fiction. When Star Wars released in 1978 in Japan, he went with the members of the Sci-Fi Club to its Osaka premiere. Hearing about the American cosplayers who dressed up as Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, and Darth Vader, They wanted to show the extent of Japanese cosplay and fandom. In Okada's case, he went as the character Daimajin, a giant stone statue of a samurai inhabited by a spirit. Ironically, he ended up being mistaken for Darth Vader, despite this. But the mecca for Osaka's science fiction fandom was Daikon. As a part of the annual Nihon SF Taikai conventions, the convention changes its name depending on the location. So if the convention takes place in Tokyo, it's referred to as Tokan, and in the case of its third time in Osaka in 1981, it was known as Daikon 3. (1981) From students to professionals. It was at a sci-fi festival called Setokan in 1978 that Okada met fellow otaku Yasuhiro Takeda from Kindai University, and 2 years later, they decided to team up as organizers of the Daikon 3 convention. Takeda was to be the chairman for the convention, and after meeting a crew from Osaka University of the Arts, they began production on an animated opening film for the convention. The crew itself was made up of first-year university students. Hideaki Anno, Hiroyuki Yamaga, and Takami Akai. You should recognize at least one of those names. Together, they assembled at the Okada family factory, occupied an entire floor, and began production on the very first work of the newly established Daikon film. Without the budget to purchase proper cells, the team instead purchased a sheet of vinyl and attempted to use it in animation. It wasn't very successful. The paint peeled off and stuck onto the other vinyl cells when they were stacked. But then again, it wasn't like we had any other options, remarks Takeda. Having never worked on a cell animation before, the process was a learning experience for the whole staff. They didn't really plan anything beforehand either. This turned out to be a larger problem in years to come, and there was no real definitive roles. The staff just worked on everything together, but after 11 months of hard work, up to the very morning of the Daikon 3 convention, their very first animation was complete. But the animation staff weren't done yet. After experiencing the thrill of working on an anime together, they properly established the independent studio, Daikon Film, whilst the organizers of the Daikon 3 convention immediately requested to hold another convention in Osaka in just 2 years. And thanks to the creators of Macross at Studio Nue, they didn't have to wait until 1983 to start animating again. After having seen their work on Daikon 3, the trio of animators, Ano, Yamaga, and Akai, were asked to participate in Super Dimension Fortress Macross. The The team traveled to Tokyo, where they were put to work at Artland, the studio cooperating on production with Nue. Because of the specialist skills that they displayed working on Daikon 3, the group was split to work with different parts of the production team. Hideaki Anno worked with the Mega Animators. Takumi Akai worked with the character animation team. And Hiroyuki Yamaga worked with the director himself, eventually being asked to direct the series' 9th episode. This became a learning experience for the Daikon team, except Akai. Due to the character animations director's advanced technique, he found himself unable to participate and headed back to Osaka to continue work on Daikon film. Studio Nue and Daikon film had a lot in common at the time. Like Daikon, Studio Nue was also the result of a group of fellow sci-fi fans who went on to create animation. And as such, they reached out to more members of sci-fi college fan clubs, 3 of whom were Akai's old high school friends. Takeda looks back on this time as the first formation of Gainax. Many of the connections rekindled whilst working on Makuros became the building blocks for the upcoming anime studio. Meanwhile, back in Osaka, Okada and Takeda were working on a new business venture, a store named General Products. They weren't just anime fans after all. It was initially Okada's idea to begin with, but since Takeda wasn't busy, he became dragged into it. The idea was that they would create a science fiction hobby store that not only sold merchandise, but licensed and created it as well. Their focus was on making licensing deals with large companies and developing garage kits, successfully predicting the growth of the hobby over the coming decade. This was all referenced in Otaku no Video, a semi-autobiographical OVA produced at Studio Gainax, with the screenplay written by Okada himself. Upon opening, the store was greeted with a line of 200 excited fans, and they sold out of stock on the first day. General Products releases were regarded as premium and exclusive products. They even produced merchandise for the Daikon film releases. (1983) Moving on from Daikon. Production of the Daikon 4 opening film began in April of 1983. Having created tokusatsu, special effects live action, films throughout 1982 after the opening of General Products, this was the first animated film the studio had created since the Daikon 3 opening in 1981. However, now with the experience from working on Makuros, they were prepared to go above and beyond their previous animated film. In fact, the staff at Makuros wanted the Daikon film team to stay and work on more episodes, but they insisted that they had to return to Osaka to work on Daikon 4. With the Daikon 3 opening animation being such an iconic part of the convention, attendees already had high expectations for the film that would introduce Daikon 4. Sales of the video copy of Daikon 3 were also regarded as the reason the convention escaped bankruptcy. This time, the staff had production experience and worked as a proper animation studio. They rented out a floor of an old building and set to work. Yasuhiro Takeda describes the conditions as a sweatshop, an apt description for a building with no air conditioning being rented out over the summer. Being near the equator, Japanese summers can get incredibly humid. What's more, the building they were renting was locked every night from 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. And so the majority of the staff would frequently be locked in the studio overnight. But thanks to the main staff's new experience within animation production and the help of various creators whom they'd collaborated with on Macross, Daikon 4 wasn't just a better product than its prequel, but it was produced in less time as well. While they weren't able to create their original story idea, they instead opted for something action-packed and exciting. With more stunning moments of animation, better direction, and more use of copyrighted characters, which made it very difficult to release later on. Daikon 4 instantly became one of the iconic animated films of the 1980s. But what was next for Daikon Film? Hideaki Anno had already moved to Tokyo by this point, after getting expelled for not paying his tuition. Not that he attended classes anyways. And much of the rest of the staff had already dropped out by this point. With no new animated projects in sight, Daikon Film buried themselves in new tokusatsu productions, while Okada and Takeda continued working at General Products, eventually splitting off from Okada's family company to become independent. Meanwhile, 500 kilometers away in Tokyo, Hideaki Anno was diving headfirst into the anime industry. More specifically, Ghibli. Being hired by Hayao Miyazaki himself, Anno was given the role of key animator for their film, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Spending nights at the studio, he worked on the climax of the film, creating the scenes featuring the God Warrior as it steams and drips. During production, Miyazaki had given Anno his moped so as to be able to travel around Tokyo, and their friendship became the basis for collaborations, even in 2017. But Anno wasn't there just to work at Ghibli, and was soon being invited to work on Macross SDF. Do you remember Love? The theatrical version of the TV series that Anno had gotten his start in the anime industry from. Back in Osaka, Okada and Yamaga were working on a new plan. They were still attached to the original idea they developed for Daikon 4 and decided they wanted to see it realized as an OVA. They'd kept it to themselves for a while, but by the end of 1984, they decided that they wanted to create a proper animation production company in Tokyo. Using funds from their general products store as a starting investment, they formed a company and invited a previous Tezuka Productions producer who they knew from sci-fi fandom to help them run it professionally. And so, with plans for a brand new anime, Studio Gainax was formed on December 24th, 1984. Part 2. Studio Gainax was one of the first studios to bring together merchandising and anime production under one roof. Not as part of any specific goals, but rather just because these were two hobbies that they took seriously. By producing merchandise from their own productions, they were able to reap more of the profits instead of having to deal with paying licensing fees. The team at Gainax were never great businessmen, but they'd always excelled when it came to finding ways to sell. (1985) Gainax aims for the top. The distance between General Products and Gainax was never really clear. They were two separate companies, but until they merged in 1987, they operated as two separate companies that many of the staff worked between. General Products wasn't just helpful as a way of providing funds, however. It also proved instrumental to making introductions at companies whose support they needed. Their first step was to contact Bandai with their idea. Having been in contact with the company for merchandise produced at General Products, they contacted a producer by the name of Shigeru Watanabe, who ended up being a major reason for Gainax's success through the rest of the 1980s. Shigeru Watanabe wasn't someone to make snap decisions by himself. When approached with Gainax's proposal for a new sci-fi anime project, he instead opted to contact the anime directors that he respected. For a long time, Watanabe would contact Mamoru Oshii, who had just completed the first OVA, Dalos, and ask for his thoughts on potential new films. Watanabe had only just moved from planning new figurines for Bandai, and so for many years, he would ask for advice, particularly from Mamoru Oshii. Toshio Okada later remarked amusingly that Oshii's advice was very good for Gainax, as Watanabe worked to get the film a high budget and turned it from a direct-to-video production into a theatrical film, aiming to compete with Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. In fact, even the title of the film was chosen to draw comparisons between the two. The Wings of Honea Mise, I think. Bandai even asked Hayao Miyazaki himself to look over a short pilot film of Wings. Like Oshii, Miyazaki was impressed and also expressed the need for a large budget. The film ended up costing 800 million yen, $3.3 million at the time. It became a lot of responsibility for the anime staff only in their 20s, and it resulted in a series of bad decisions. This idea was originally a story for the sci-fi convention goers of Osaka. Even the city the Royal Space Force operates from is based on Osaka. They were now expected to turn this idea into something with mass appeal. To create this film, Gainax moved to a much larger building than they'd prepared for when they believed this would just be a short OVA film. However, after production ended and the film failed to make back its budget, they downsized to a more sustainable location. Okada later stated that he regards the film as having failed to hit the mainstream and believes the screenplay and plot made the film far too niche for a wide audience. Additionally, when selling the rights to localize the Wings of Honiamise for English-speaking audiences, Gainax accepted a costly deal that ended up embarrassing the original film. It was hastily translated and dubbed, being originally released in the US as StarQuest, with parts of the story changed and characters renamed. It only screened once, and with Toshio Okada in attendance. A member of staff on the dub proclaimed that they changed the scripts due to the original not being very good anyways. The film was later retranslated and redubbed, and got back its original title, and released to the public, gaining a cult audience in America. Following the Wings of Honiamise, Bandai offered Studio Gainax a deal. If they could come up with an anime idea that would sell more than 10,000 copies, they would fund it. At the time, Gainax was working on other projects, including the first anime adaptation of Appleseed, an hour-long OVA directed by the assistant director of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. But Gainax took Bandai's offer seriously and started planning Gunbuster, known as Aim for the Top in Japan, a new OVA series. At this point, it's not really possible to nail down exactly whose story it ended up being. Although Gainax had experience in anime production, they still preferred to cross the boundaries of rules and discuss ideas together. Originally, the OVAs would have been directed by Shinji Higuchi, one of the other original Daikon film members, who eventually went on to direct the Attack on Titan live-action movies and Shin Godzilla with Hideaki Anno. But their schedules didn't end up aligning thanks to delays in the projects. Gunbuster was left with a screenplay, but no director. At the time, Hideaki Anno was busy on other projects, but after reading a screenplay by Hiroyuki Yamaga, he requested that he be the one to direct the series. Anno was a huge fan of Yamaga's script, but that didn't stop him from changing it entirely. Yamaga wanted it to be a stupid robot girl anime, but it was instead formed into something that was partly a parody anime, while also being a genuinely compelling mega story. The series started out like Yamaga's work, but over time, he added more of his own quirks. In fact, the sixth and final episode was shot entirely in black and white, actually costing the studio even more money than they planned for. During production, Gainax upscaled again, returning to the building in which they produced Wings of Honiamise. In 1988, the first part of Hideaki Anno's directorial debut was released. (1989), a production disaster. While the lead staff at Studio Gainax started thinking about a new project to follow Gunbuster, Takami Akai had an idea for a project that would transform the studio. As a fan of PC games, he realized that the studio could take advantage of all the animators on staff to create art for their own games. He approached Yasuhiro Takeda about his idea, who gave him the green light and set out to create a new game by himself. The game was called Cybernetic High School and featured the player answering questions to gradually strip the female characters. Unsurprisingly, the title became incredibly popular, and other members at Gainax, including Toshio Okada, joined in on creating sequels, including one featuring the cast of Gunbuster. At this time, the studio building was a mesh of activity. In the main area would be the animators. In a room near to Okada's office would be the general products team, producing garage kits. And further along would be a computer space, where the staff worked on new Gainax games. But in the meantime, conflict had arisen in the leadership. When they had originally founded Gainax, they'd brought on Tezuka Productions producer by the name of Hiroaki Inoue. As the only professional producer at the company, he'd been responsible for dealing with budgeting and keeping Bandai happy during the production of The Wings of Honiamise. But the current president, Toshio Okada, wasn't as reliable. Back when he was the president of General Products, the staff staged a walkout due to Okada's disorganization as head of the company. Okada even admitted years later that he was in charge of Gainax. They'd be making loads of money one month and no money at all the next. There was no consistency. Inoue challenged Okada for the leadership of the company, and in response, invited an old friend from General Products, Takashi Sawamura, to come to Tokyo and help lead the studio. This prompted Inoue to intercept a production proposal from NHK, asking for character designs and pre-production ideas for brand new projects. Inoue took control by sending his pitch to NHK behind Okada's back. This would become Nadia, the Secret of Blue Water. When the pitch was accepted, the rest of the Gainax leadership went to NHK and demanded that Inoue be removed from the project entirely. The rest of the production staff sided with Gainax. Inoue left both the project and Gainax itself in August of 1989 and eventually joined AIC as a producer. The story of Nadia was pitched by Hayao Miyazaki, but after discussions, he dropped out from the project, leaving the director's spot open. At first, this was given to Yoshiyuki Sadamoto, but he was soon replaced with Hideaki Anno after he decided he'd prefer to work on character design instead. Nadia, the Secret of Blue Water, was driving Gainax closer to bankruptcy. The proposal, written up by Inoue, was far too risky for the studio to afford. As well as this, Gainax's usual production environment didn't suit the stresses of TV animation production at all. Directors and writers would take home scripts and screenplays to change them to surprise each other, all with the approval of Okada. This sort of environment wouldn't normally have caused as many problems, but there were large parts of the series that were produced in Korea that drove the series into a situation that Okada described as real chaos, just like hell. It didn't help that Hideaki Anno struggled with finding an ending, eventually deciding on the finale just 3 months before it was meant to air. "1991. In the beginning of Gainax, we were all just friends," said Toshio Okada. What saved the studio financially at the time was Takumi Akai's game development. Prompted by an idea by Okada to make a game about raising a girl, instead of taking the clothes off of them, Akai produced Princess Maker, the first in one of Gainax's most successful series of games. It was so successful that after Nadia, Okada suggested that the studio pull out of anime production entirely and just focus on making games. In the Notenki memoirs, Takeda recalls thinking, "You effing idiot," at the time as he teamed up with Akai to argue that anime was the reason their game development was popular to begin with. In fact, their video game adaptation of Nadia, the Secret of Blue Water, was considered wildly popular. The studio was in a slump, and Toshio Okada wasn't doing anything. Takashi Sawamura eventually cut his salary, while Yasuhiro Takeda asked him to quit. What came next is unclear. Regardless, Toshio Okada, the Ota King, and the first member of Daikon Film and Studio Gainax, left in 1992 after 12 years of working in anime production. He has never been involved in animation production since, and has spent the last 25 years as a pundit, writing books and conducting lectures on otaku culture. He has a YouTube. Part 3. It would be a lie to say that the problems the Gainax staff had with Toshio Okada were purely business. The staff were becoming increasingly frustrated with his loud personality and lack of action. He would talk about grand plans for the studio that he never followed through with, and teased that he would leave the studio, only to go back on his word. General Manager Yasuhiro Takeda later referred to him as a hindrance to their new anime productions. But removing Okada wasn't a simple fix to all of Gainax's problems, and what followed was the worst year in the studio's history, saved by one remarkable show. (1992) General Products' worst year. It's difficult to determine if Toshio Okada was a good studio president or not, but history tells us that at the very least, he was an important studio figure and one of the main forces behind the studio's otaku image. Replacing him, therefore, was not a simple task, and resulted in a strange dynamic where two people could claim that they, in fact, were the president of Studio Gainax. To the fans, it was the credited director, Hiroyuki Yamaga, that led the studio. But to the investors, it was Takashi Sawamura who was the president, a job he'd already been supporting Okada with for the past 2 years. This was the first step in turning Gainax into what Okada later regarded as an ordinary company. In some ways, financial responsibility, sensible work hours, and organized schedules is antithetical to the core of Studio Gainax as a studio. But on reflection, the studio would not have survived the following years with Okada's chaos strategy. They just finished work on one of their most difficult projects, Nadia, the Secret of Blue Water, only to face the worst year of the studio's lifetime. Up until now, General Products could be considered a joint company with Gainax. While they were supported financially by Gainax and had the same head management, General Products had an entirely separate reputation, image, and goals. One of their largest accomplishments was the establishment of the figure and merchandise convention Tokyo Wonder Festival in 1985, following a successful smaller event the year prior at the General Products store. The event initially took place on the third floor of the Tokyo Metropolitan Industrial Trade Center, and over the years grew until the venue was the whole building itself. However, while General Products were amazed by the turnout, it wasn't how they envisioned the company. Although Wonder Festival, was popular, General Products garage kit sales were faltering. The event was loved by fans of figurines, garage kits, and other merchandise, but it wasn't promoting General Products' wares effectively. This informed their decision to pull out of OneFest and hand it over to competitor Kyoto in 1992. Kyoto's OneFest boasted an attendance of 50,000 plus. This wasn't General Products' only failed attempt to promote their own products. In 1989, they set up the now infamous General Products USA with Leigh Hernandez and Torn Smith. The original plans were to bring both General Products and General Anime merchandise over to the USA, where anime fans still considered finding anime goods to be a treasure hunt. Hernandez later recalls that the staff at Gainax, General Products, would be buying products from Animate and marking them up to sell in the US, a strategy that got them blacklisted from Animate before they'd even started. With terrible communication between the US and Japan sides, very little merchandise actually being shipped, and US staff not being paid, General Products USA was one of Gainax's most mishandled projects. However, their attempts towards capturing the American market did result in the creation of AnimeCon 91, the first American convention to be sponsored by a company within the Japanese anime industry. While AnimeCon only lasted a year, it was subsequently turned into Anime Expo in 1992, the largest anime convention in the US today. I agree. With subsequent failures to sell products despite ambitious plans both in Japan and abroad, General Products was closed and incorporated back into Gainax in 1992 after 10 years in business. Up until now, General Products was used as a way to fund Gainax anime productions. But thanks to the Gainax attitude of attempting to branch out as much as possible, General Products continued to overextend into unknown territories that eventually defeated the company. (1992) Studio Gainax's worst year. (1992) was a long year for Gainax. In addition to the end of General Products, the studio struggled to launch a new TV or film project. They were still being kept afloat by Takumi Akai's successful games, particularly in regards to the launch of what would become a series of Princess Maker titles. But this was a studio built on creating anime. At the time, the new president, Hiroyuki Yamaga, was determined to produce a sequel to Royal Space Force named Uru in Blue. Yamaga had attempted to pitch the project before as the first film directed by Hideaki Anno, but Toshio Okada rejected the idea several times, stating that the idea wasn't interesting enough. Okada went so far as to vow never to let him make Uru in Blue, claiming that it was just a ripoff of the 1984 Walter Hill movie, Streets of Fire. Now that Okada was out of the way, Yamaga took the initiative to restart the Uru in Blue project in 1992. Despite doubts from Yasuhiro Takeda from funding, the Gainax team threw themselves headfirst into the project, designing characters and writing scripts. They didn't have a lucrative deal from Bandai Visual this time, and so they just continued working on the project with the confidence that they would have the budget sorted out at some point. This meant that Gainax was paying money to their staff to produce a film that they weren't confident in finishing at all. With the closure of General Products came the sudden realization that they couldn't possibly fund Uru in Blue themselves. The studio had relied on General Products to fund their new ideas ever since Daikon 4. But without the support, they had no option but to stop production on Uru in Blue entirely. Okada believed they became an ordinary company after he had left. But the reality is that the closure of General Products was the nail in the coffin for a Gainax developed on crazy ideas. Nobody in Gainax took the production of Uru in Blue well. Even before the project was halted, there was very little progress made, and very little confidence that it would find its way to cinemas in the end. 1992 was a year when Gainax couldn't produce their own anime. Many staff members left, and even more considered following suit. One group went on to form Studio Gonzo, directly as a response to Gainax's lack of anime output. When they finally realized Udo and Blue couldn't be produced, President Sawamura approached the entire staff, told them that Udo and Blue couldn't be made, and said that they had no confidence in being able to pay salaries from this point on. This was Sawamura's way of downscaling the company without having to fire anyone. From that point, a large portion of the company just left. Everyone who remained either faced a heavy pay cut or just took no pay at all. It was very close to being the end of Studio Gainax, but Sawamura insisted that he had a plan to bring it all back. (1995) Neon Genesis Evangelion and The Worst Plan. While the staff of Udo and Blue were in a slump after the production's cancellation, its director had started a brand new project supported by King Records. When Hideaki Anno came into Gainax revealing that a friend from King Records had asked him to work on an anime together with his company, the staff immediately got to work on their first TV anime in 4 years. The production of Neon Genesis Evangelion itself was fraught with drama. Although this was Gainax's idea, the truth is that there were only 3 employees at Gainax continuously working on the show, with most of the production taking place at the much larger Tatsunoko production. According to Toshio Okada, Anno told him that Tatsunoko production were to blame for the loss of cell animation before it had been filmed, meaning that time was lost on having to reduce scenes. With Tatsunoko being the main production studio, they were responsible for scheduling issues that occurred midway through production. Similarly, Hideaki Anno continued his typical habit of working on each episode at a time rather than thinking of an ending that would bring it all together. Okada describes his style to that of a manga author, where they will just focus on getting each chapter out, rather than plan out a specific path to an ending. Obviously, this works in manga, where it's a 1 or 2 man job, but this just meant that the scripts and storyboard would arrive too late for the animators. In later interviews, Anno made a habit of blaming scheduling or the budget for issues with the ending of Neon Genesis Evangelion. But Okada insists that he just hates being asked about the 2 episodes. Last 2 episodes. In spite of this, the series was an unprecedented success. So unprecedented that they didn't bother having Asuka speak proper German because they never thought anyone from Germany would watch the show. The series topped the charts for DVD sales and became a cultural phenomenon. Gainax had become resigned to thinking that anime was just something that they wanted to create. It was their other ventures that were there to make money. Akai had left the company in 1994 and taken the Princess Maker series with him. Evangelion needed to be a success, and the idea of creating an anime that actually made money seemed like a miracle to them. Not only was Evangelion selling well, but more people had become attracted to Gainax's current games on sale thanks to the series. In the years following, they started to produce best-selling Evangelion tie-in games, such as Neon Genesis Evangelion Girlfriend of Steel in 1997, and the same year, produced an alternative ending to the TV series in the film The End of Evangelion. It was a miracle for Gainax as a studio, and especially to President Sawamura personally. For him, Evangelion was the studio's big chance to get everything back on track. They'd come so close to closing after the failure of Udo and Blue, and the end of General Products, that he had resorted to desperate measures to keep the studio alive, even going so far as to commit fraud. Some theorize that this was Sawamura's attempt to put away some money so that the studio wouldn't have to face another near bankruptcy. Others believe that he just wasn't used to handling so much money and made a mistake. Regardless, in 1998, Studio Gainax president Takashi Sawamura was arrested for tax fraud after 8 years at the company. Damn. Part 4. The last. Gainax's former president, Takashi Sawamura, was arrested for the concealment of 1.5 billion yen, approximately 13.5 million US dollars, in profits by over-exaggerating production costs on Neon Genesis Evangelion. By undervaluing their profits, Gainax was able to avoid paying 560 million yen, approximately 5 million US dollars, in corporate taxes. The tax scheme lasted for 2 years, but even after the studio got caught out, they were still on the rise. (1998) A post-Evangelion Gainax. Despite one of the studio presidents now being in jail, Studio Gainax had finally become a company that was able to consistently produce new anime. The 4-year anime gap between Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water, and Neon Genesis Evangelion never happened again. Instead of focusing on just one series, Gainax were suddenly able to pitch multiple series. Expect 1 or 2 to be accepted, only for their sponsors and investors to approve all of them. A post-Evangelion Gainax was an unprecedentedly busy one. In 1998, Hideaki Anno was offered the chance to direct the adaptation to the His and Her Circumstances manga. Anno was so used to creating his own original projects and being able to expand on his own interpretations and ideas that the original author believed he'd gone too far and had the wrong emphasis on the material. During the early years of Gainax, Kazuya Tsunemaki was regarded as the protege or understudy to Hideaki Anno. Having originally worked as an animator on several episodes of Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water, he went on to direct several episodes of Neon Genesis Evangelion, including the final two. However, even though he was brought on to co-direct the first half of the alternative film, The End of Evangelion, he maintained that the original TV ending was fine and that the film was unnecessary. It wasn't until 2000 that Tsunemaki would finally make his own solo directorial debut with a 6-part OVA series, FLCL, Funikuni. Even with the issues surrounding His and Her Circumstances, Anno's friend at King Records was eager to accept new pitches from the studio. After completing work on Evangelion, it was Anno that asked Tsunemaki to come up with a new idea for an anime series that they could pitch. This became a lot of pressure for a new director, and it took him a year before he'd finally decided on a concept. Anno's advice was to not worry about whether everyone would like it or not, and just focus on making something that he wanted to create. The result was a high-paced series that worked as a love letter to many different subcultures or otaku. It was a series that even Tsunemaki himself advocated watching several times, and recognizes that it wasn't easy to understand. Like many other Gainax productions, it was one that broke from tradition and was later recognized as one of the crazy shows that was only greenlit because of a post-Evangelion Gainax. 2004, Gainax aims for the top again. In 1999, studio president Hiroyuki Yamaga claimed to be writing a novelization of Udu in Blue that would be turned into an anime that would be released in 2003. The novelization would be in 7 parts, and the 8th part would be adapted into an anime film. However, he became too busy to finish after only writing 3 of the short stories. During 2002, he was responsible for writing the 2 Gainax shows, Mahado Matek and Magical Shopping Arcade Abenobashi, after pitching them to enthusiastic investors excited about working with the studio behind Evangelion. Bandai Visual had approached Gainax about a sequel to one of their classic series for the studio's 20th anniversary. But it wasn't Yamaga's Udu in Blue. Instead, they were looking at producing Gunbuster 2, Die-Buster, a sequel to Hideaki Anno's 1988 Gunbuster OVAs. The problem was that there was nobody at Gainax who could direct it after having pitched so many new series. Anno himself was busy directing a live-action Cutie Honey film at the time, and so it was up to Anno's understudy, Kazuya Tsunamaki, to direct yet another hot-blooded original OVA series. There were discussions about making it into a TV series, but they settled with producing 6 OVA episodes, just like the original Gunbuster. By making it into a series of OVAs, rather than a TV series, it could be made into a kind of 2-year event, with episodes being released periodically. It also meant that Hideaki Anno could participate later when he had free time. To conclude the series in 2006, Gainax produced a theatrical version of both Gunbuster and Die-Buster by condensing each of the OVAs. Meanwhile, while fans clamored to the cinema, Hideaki Anno and Kazuya Tsunamaki were looking ahead towards their next challenge. (2006) Farewell, Studio Kata. Hello, Gurren Lagann. At first, it was theorized that Studio Kata was created as a sub-studio for Studio Gainax, where they would create a sequel or alternate ending to Neon Genesis Evangelion. It surprised nobody to hear that Hideaki Anno was working on Evangelion again, since the series had become such a major part of his image as a director. But the real shock came when it was realized that Anno was leaving Gainax to make it. It was his belief that to produce a new vision of Evangelion, it was important that he moved on to a new company. Gainax would still cooperate on the films, but Kata would lead the production. At Gainax, this was to become a cycle. The old guard create something popular, leave, and then give the new generation a chance to create their own productions. The problem was that with the creators comes funding. The King Records connection that Gainax used to greenlight Neon Genesis Evangelion and FLCL was a connection with Hideaki Anno specifically, and not Gainax. The studio would have struggled to find sponsors for new projects if their attempts to elevate the next generation were unsuccessful. When Aniplex producer Yosuke Toba entered the anime industry, he had 3 goals that he wished to accomplish. He wanted to work with Hayao Miyazaki, Jun Maeda, and with Gainax. At this point, he'd already worked as an assistant director on Miyazaki's Howl's Moving Castle, and so his next step was to work with Gainax Much like how the younger staff at the studio had joined because they were inspired by Gainax productions when they were growing up. It now became the case where even the sponsors had reverence for the studio. So, when Aniplex received a rough proposal from the director of Dead Leaves for a Gainax mega anime titled Tengen Toppa Goden Nagan, he jumped on board to help. Hiroyuki Imaishi took a similar approach to Kazuya Tsunamaki in that he immediately set out to create something hot-blooded and unconventional. Imaishi had been working at Gainax for over 10 years at that point, and had picked up inspirations along the way. Of course, much of the rest of the core staff were Gainax staff, as well, who have spent years learning from Evangelion and FLCL. What resulted was a cultural phenomena that even today is regarded as one of Aniplex's biggest properties, and is a series that Imaishi spent years trying to recreate the appeal of. 2011. Farewell, Studio Trigger. Hello, is there anybody there? In 2011, a large portion of the Gainax staff to have worked on Tengen Toppa Goden Nagan left, with Hiroyuki Imaishi and producer Masahiko Otsuka to create Studio Trigger. The studio would be supported by a partnership with studios Sanzigen, Leiden Films, and Oride. And Yosuke Toba had told them in advance that Aniplex would support Studio Trigger productions. Meanwhile, character designer Atsushi Nishigori had been offered the chance to work at A1 Pictures on an adaptation of The Idolmaster, taking a different team of talented Gainax animators with him. The cycle continued, and the first director they chose to represent the next generation of Gainax was Yutaka Uemura, a CG artist and episode director at the studio. His project was the 2011 series, The Mystic Archives of Dantalian, an adaptation of a fantasy light novel produced by Kadokawa. Without the support of Aniplex or King Records to create original series, they were no longer available to pitch crazy ideas like they used to and have them all greenlit. Having made his debut as a director, Yutaka Uemura left Gainax after completing work on Dante Leon. He later directed Punchline with Mappa and Zero Escape creator Kotaro Uchikoshi. With the departure of Kata, Trigger, and talented individual creators, Gainax no longer had the sort of creative staff that could get a show greenlit by name alone. In 2012, the studio produced Medaka Box with Gainax veteran animator Saiki Shoji. Unlike previous directors, Shoji doesn't have a reputation for breaking down boundaries, instead being a lot more conventional compared to his predecessors. He was most recently brought on to direct their 2015 collaboration with car company Subaru, Wish Upon the Pleiades. In response to a lack of funding and support, Gainax's output slowed dramatically to one series a year, many of which being adaptations. With a lot more time on his hands, Yamaga started planning Udo and Blue again. In the 1990s, it was going to be directed by Hideaki Anno, but after Anno made it clear that he was no longer interested, the film would now be directed by Hideyuki Yamaga himself. In 2014, he announced that the film would be released in 2018, with a short 6-minute film being released the next year in 2015 titled Udo and Blue Overture. This did not happen. As of 2017, Hideyuki Yamaga had just started on the scripts. – 2017, Kata hits a nerve. It wasn't uncommon of Gainax to be unable to pay other anime companies. Gainax didn't pay co-producers Group TAC for Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water, until they'd received the massive profits from Evangelion years later. Similarly, they were consistently late in paying General Products USA Vice President Lay Hernandez back in 1989. Additionally, the studio president told their entire staff in 1992 that they would no longer be able to pay them, forcing the large majority to quit on the spot. Therefore, it was probably very clear to Hideaki Anno that Gainax had no intentions on paying back a loan from Studio Kata anytime soon. When Hideaki Anno left Gainax, he did so with the agreement that his Studio Kata would receive royalties on sales of any Gainax projects that Anno had been involved in. Kata had also lent the studio roughly 100,000 million yen, approximately 1.1 million US dollars, in 2014. Since then, Gainax fell behind on payments, incurring a lawsuit from Kata. This is Gainax's second public lawsuit, with the first being related to the rights surrounding a live-action Evangelion film. It was confirmed in 2017 that Gainax had lost the lawsuit and was ordered to pay Studio Kata the full amount. – 2018. We're down, but we're not out. Today, Studio Gainax is a splintered company. In 2014, Takami Akai left Tokyo to set up a new studio in Yonago, now referred to as Yonago Gainax. In 2016, Yasuhiro Takeda left to set up Gainax West in Kobe. That company is now planned to close and incorporate into a new studio in Kyoto known as Gainax Kyoto. Additionally, there's another team in Fukushima known as Fukushima Gainax. In 2016, Fukushima Gainax announced the anime project Flying Babies to drive tourism to the area. Currently, the main Gainax studio are working on Gunbuster 3, Udo in Blue, and a trilogy of films based on the stories of Reiji Matsumoto, known as the Zero Century Trilogy. Cool. Studio Gainax is a different entity to many different people. To some, they're the has-beens that keep promising to make a movie about fighter pilots who are also knights. To others, they are the terrible businessmen that made their lives hell. And to the many, they are the legendary creators that shaped modern anime. Yamaga has referred to Studio Gainax as a school where people come and go. They learn while working at the studio and leave when they can stand on their own feet. It's in this way that even if Gainax as business was to fold, the ideas and enthusiasm of a group of college kids who loved sci-fi in 1981 will always be a part of anime.